Chapter 31, Zhou Cheng's death, chopping up the roots. At this moment, only to see his body's aura skyrocket, his body's yuan qi boiling, his body turned sharply, like the wind like electricity, and rushed towards Chu Mo. Halfway, a battle sword slashed out one after another, a terrifying power, containing the strength of a late-stage martial artist, coming towards Chu Mo. This was Zhou Cheng's famous skill, the air-breaking blade. This blade technique was a bronze-level martial skill with 3 layers. Cultivated to the perfect realm, it could cut out brilliant saber light with infinite power. Although Zhou Qi knew this martial skill in the beginning, it was of average power because he had not yet been initiated. But at this time in Zhou Cheng's hands, it was very different. However, Zhou Cheng's entire body was wrapped in a terrifying killing aura. Because the power was too horrible, even the void issued an unbearable whistling sound, and crushed towards Chu Mo. Although he had not yet arrived in front of Chu Mo, the harsh blade qi had already scraped one's skin raw and painful. At this moment, Zhou Cheng was already using his strongest mastery. He vowed to kill Chu Mo with a single strike. And in the face of this terrifying blade, Chu Mo was calm and composed, not the least bit unruffled, possessing the gathering talent. Chu Mo already had 3 talents so far. The inferior wind attribute talent allowed Chu Mo to possess a speed that far exceeded that of an ordinary martial artist, or even a martial artist. And the thunder attribute talent could also give Chu Mo the ability to conquer several times the strength. The higher blade cultivation talent even allowed Chu Mo to comprehend the blade momentum. Coupled with the bronze-grade martial skill-breaking blade that had long been cultivated to perfection, and the silver-grade martial skill berserking wind-robbing thunder blade that had been initiated, nowadays Chu Mo's strength, he didn't dare to say that he was invincible at the same level, but an ordinary martial artist was by no means a match for him. As for the Zhou Cheng in front of him, let's use you to verify just how far my strength has grown nowadays. Why isn't he dodging? What is he doing? Zhou Cheng's attention was always on Chu Mo's body. But what made him feel strange was that from the time he had used his blade with all his might, this person had been standing in place and seemed to have frozen. And by now, his blade was on the verge of landing on his head, and this person was surprisingly still motionless. Could it be that he was scared silly? Whatever. No matter what the hell he's up to, as long as this knife of mine falls on him, even if this person's strength reaches the martial master realm, he will surely die. Thinking of this, Zhou Cheng's eyes grew even more vicious. The determination to behead Chu Mo also grew more resolute. However, right at this moment, a sudden change occurred. But he saw the dust under Chu Mo's feet suddenly rise towards the outside, rolling up countless waves of air and smoke. And the corners of his clothes were even more windless, sounding fiercely. What was even more terrifying was the sword that Chu Mo held in his hand unexpectedly trembled steeply at this moment as well. Buzz buzz buzz. A slight trembling sound rang out if nothing else. It was slow at first, then suddenly sharp. This is... Zhou Cheng's eyelids suddenly jumped straight up, and trepidation arose in his heart. An unprecedented uneasiness spread from the bottom of his heart. Clank. At this moment of urgency, a sound of gold and iron clashing suddenly resounded from the field. However, he saw the long sword in Chu Mo's hand violently come out of its sheath, and then instantly swung out. The pizzicato knife chi came out across the sky, and it actually came out afterward, chopping out at an unbelievable speed. In an instant, Zhou Cheng only saw a cold aura chopping straight towards him. As soon as this blade came out, a slight chill appeared around him. This was a blade full of strength. It was also a blade full of killing intent. More. An unstoppable blade. Ka-ching. Ka-ching. Under this blade, Zhou Cheng's saber aura instantly fell apart and melted away inch by inch. Not good. Retreat. Hearing this sound, Zhou Cheng was horrified and wanted to withdraw. Just before he could withdraw his hand, the long knife in his hand broke into dozens of fragments with a bark. The blade qi, on the other hand, was as powerful as a bamboo, and in his incredulous gaze, it chopped at his body. Like slicing gold and breaking jade, like a wall collapsing into a beam, the blade chi flickered and disappeared. It was as if it stood still in this instant. A long time later. Prickla. The slow sound of returning the sword to its sheath resounded abruptly. It broke the silence. With a knife slashing out, Chu Mo did not even look at Zhou Qing and crossed straight over this person. And behind him. Plop. Zhou Qing knelt on both knees, his eyes dull. At his neck, a blood-colored trace spread from the left all the way to the right, then slowly blossomed. Snort. Thin lines of blood flew out. I am not willing to. Feeling the temperature and qi and blood that were rapidly draining from his body, Zhou Qing used the last of his body's strength to utter 4 words. With difficulty the words fell. With a booming sound of something heavy falling to the ground, Zhou Qing's body completely fell to the ground. There was no more movement. All of his future, all of his ambitions also went up in smoke. As of this moment. Zhou Qing, dead. After killing Zhou Qing, it was time to collect the property. Chu Mo searched around the villa and soon found a storage room with several safes. When he directly cut it open with his knife chi, he saw a room full of yuan stones and many ferocious beast materials. At a rough count, there were at least hundreds of thousands of yuan stones alone. And the ferocious beast materials were even more piled up and highly valued. Horses don't get fat without night grass. What a fortune! Seeing these, Chu Mo's eyes lit up. Zhou Qing, as a rather powerful and strong person on the side of the base, had entered the martial artist realm for more than 10 years, and the wealth he had accumulated was naturally extremely rich, but right now, all of these belonged to him. Without hesitation, he directly collected them all into his storage bag. Afterwards, after carefully searching some more to make sure that he hadn't missed anything, Chu Mo intended to leave. Although the previous fight between him and Zhou Qing was short, the commotion was not small, and it was estimated that it had already attracted quite a few people's attention, so perhaps the law enforcement team had already rushed over at this moment. Go home. Chu Mo made an immediate decision and directly turned his head and left. And right after Chu Mo had just left, not a moment later, the base's law enforcement team quickly rushed over. And when they saw the ground full of corpses, everyone couldn't help but suck in a breath of cool air. All of them are dead, even Zhou Qing, who was at the late martial artist realm, is dead. After inspecting them, a martial artist from the law enforcement team reported when the captain heard this, he only felt his scalp tingle. Although Zhou Qing's strength wasn't much, he was still a not-so-weak force within the size of the base. And now that the entire force, from top to bottom, had been almost completely exterminated, this was not a small matter. From the wounds, the one who killed them was a notably strong swordsman. Zhou Qing didn't even have the strength to resist, and was directly struck in the vitals by a knife, so I think it should be Zhou Qing's enemies coming to the door to seek revenge. After investigating the cause of death, the law enforcement captain's face was grave as he said, "This is a powerful swordsman, and is beyond the scope of what we can handle. Immediately gather the situation and report this news up to the top for a decision." Hearing this, the people under their command responded, "Yes." The law enforcement team began to deal with the aftermath. On the other hand, Chu Mo, at this moment, had already returned to his home. Starting to count the harvest. Chapter 32, Mid-Martial Artist, 5 times the speed of sound, comparable to martial master's strength. 460,000 lower-grade yuan stones. 35 portions of second-grade ferocious beast blood, and 4 portions of third-grade ferocious beast blood. Plus a large amount of grade 2 fierce beast materials and precious medicinal herbs. The total value is over 1,000,000 yuan stones. After counting the harvest from beheading Zhou Qing, even Chu Mo was stunned by such terrifying wealth. It was truly worthy of being a senior martial artist. After decades of accumulation, one could truly call his family a huge fortune. After calming down, Chu Mo revealed a smile. With this wealth, it would be enough to support Chu Mo's cultivation to the late stage of martial artist, or even to step into the martial master realm. Cultivate. The next step is to cultivate with a single-minded focus, striving to raise his realm up as soon as possible and reach the martial master realm. Only then can I have the strength to control my own destiny in the Luoyang base. Chu Mo secretly thought. After placing all these yuan stones and fierce beast materials in separate categories, Chu Mo then took out a spirit fruit. Wind spirit fruit. Produced from the wind spirit grass. When he was at the outskirts of the Great Shu Mountain, it was first discovered by Du Jing, but was accidentally snatched by Su Guang. It was precisely because of this that a series of subsequent events had been triggered. And with Su Guang being killed by him, this wind spirit fruit naturally fell into Chu Mo's hands. It is said that this fruit is capable of allowing martial artists with wind attribute talent to gain enlightenment, thus potentially enhancing their talent. Perhaps it's possible to try it out. Nowadays, Chu Mo's wind attribute talent was only inferior, and under full stimulation, it could give him nearly 10 times the speed. If he could raise his wind attribute talent to medium, how terrifying would that be? It was estimated that even a senior martial artist would not be able to catch up. Thinking about this, Chu Mo immediately washed the wind spirit fruit and then ate it. It was sweet and crisp. As soon as he entered the mouth, it transformed into a stream of pure energy that merged into his body. The physical body seemed to have lightened up a bit. Vaguely, it seemed as if it had a closer connection with the wind around it. It's working. Chu Mo's spirit was revitalized and he continued to eat. It didn't take a while. He ate most of the wind spirit fruit one after another, and right at that moment, Chu Mo suddenly felt a stream of warmth emerge from his limbs and bones, and his body felt as if it was being massaged by a pair of tender hands, soothing and refreshing. A moment later, this warm current disappeared. Chu Mo stretched his fists and feet, only to feel that his body had lightened up a lot, as if he had been cleansed by a simple scripture. Taking a look at the personal information. Target, Chu Mo. Physique, high cultivation physique. Talent, advanced blade cultivation talent, medium wind attribute talent, inferior thunder attribute talent. Looking at the wind attribute talent that had become medium, a smile appeared on Chu Mo's face. Sure enough, it had been upgraded. Try the speed after metamorphosis. It was already nighttime, but Chu Mo was still a bit impatient. He directly opened the window and jumped out onto the street. At this time, the street was already deserted and was very clean. Chu Mo then directly opened his wind attribute talent, without any violence, and exerted it with full force. Boom! Only a sound of breaking air was heard steeply, and in an instant, Chu Mo had already crossed a distance of 100 meters. Underworld. Chu Mo felt as if he had broken some sort of boundary. Speed of sound. This thought instantly appeared in his mind. The propagation of sound in the air was 340 meters per second, and Chu Mo's speed had definitely surpassed the speed of sound at this moment. After several tests, Chu Mo finally arrived at a rough value. Medium wind attribute talent, speed increase reaches about 15 times. Under full force running, it's close to 5 times the speed of sound. This was definitely an extremely terrifying speed. Ordinary martial artists could at most achieve 100 meters per second. Only a martial artist could reach supersonic speed. And Chu Mo had heard that even at the peak realm of a martial master, the ultimate speed could only reach 5 to 10 times the speed of sound. That means today's me is already roughly the same speed as a peak martial master. This result made Chu Mo very energized. The only martial art in the world was speed. This might be a bit too absolute. But being fast, it was true that one could break many impossibilities. For example, right now, Chu Mo was only at the early stage of the martial artist realm, but by relying on 5 times the speed of sound, he possessed the qualifications to fight against a strong martial artist and not even be weak. Of course, Chu Mo would not be complacent because of this. Being fast was just having the qualification of not being a weak underdog. However, if one wanted to defeat a martial master, one still needed the strength to match it. Otherwise, even if your speed was fast, your strength would not be able to break the opponent's defense, so what was the point? Raise your realm and grow your strength. Chu Mo secretly thought, thinking so, he took out a bottle of third-grade ferocious beast blood from his storage pouch, opened the cork, and a stream of pure qi and blood power immediately gushed outwards. All the yuan qi in Chu Mo's body was also mobilized, as if it was craving for something. There was no hesitation. Straight away, he drank it in one gulp. Boom! As soon as he entered the mouth, berserk energy instantly raged within his body. The energy of the third-level ferocious beast blood was indeed far beyond the second-level ferocious beast blood. Even Chu Mo felt that the qi and blood in his body was vaguely riotous, and seemed to be somewhat unable to be suppressed. At that moment, he didn't dare to be slow. Immediately, he executed the yuan power body forging method, slowly absorbing the raging energy in his body. And the next few days, Chu Mo went out during the day and went to the martial cultivation building to open a practice room to raise his cultivation. The reason why he didn't stay at home was mainly because the place at home was too small to perform. The slightest inattention would damage the furniture. And it was only at night that he would come back early and cook for Qin Shiwei. In the blink of an eye. It was the passage of half a month. This day in the afternoon, when Chu Mo drank a portion of the third-level ferocious beast blood, he then began to perform the body forging method to absorb the energy. Half an hour later, a set of body forging techniques was finished. Chu Mo suddenly felt that the qi and blood power in his body was surging wildly, and the tendons and bones in his body were boiling along with it, as if he was being roasted by fire. As soon as he moved his mind, he felt that the entire body's qi and blood were mobilized. Every inch of the bones and sinews were stimulated, and the sinews and bones chimed in unison, causing Gu Chang'an's body to emit gusts of thunderous sounds, like muffled thunder on a summer's day. The sinews and bones resonated in unison, and the forging of the body was accomplished. This was the sign that Chu Mo had perfected his bone forging and stepped into the middle stage of a martial artist. Mid-stage martial artist, sinews and bones chimed together, with a huge strength of 50,000 pounds. Chu Mo's eyes lit up and he moved to the strength testing machine next to the practicing room. This was an advanced strength testing machine, capable of testing a huge strength of up to 1 million pounds, and was only equipped in the advanced meditation room. Standing in front of it, Chu Mo took a deep breath, then mobilized his entire body's strength and punched out. Boom! Terrifying fist strength was born. Wherever it passed, even the void was shaken by it, emitting a sharp whistling sound when it landed on the machine. It made a loud bang, causing the machine to shake violently. At the top, a line of numbers jumped out. 50,021. Sure enough, it was a force of 50,000 pounds. Next, try the effect of the thunder attribute enhancement. Chu Mo's eyes stared, silently mobilized the lightning power in his body, then once again raised his fist and fiercely struck it. Pala! Accompanied by a fist lingering with a layer of purple electric arcs, it ruthlessly struck the machine. In an instant, the machine appeared to vibrate drastically, and the original number continued to soar, soon breaking through 6 digits. The remaining momentum then continued to climb. Only after a few moments did it stop. 202,891. Over 200,000 pounds of strength. The inferior thunder attribute talent, which had a 4-fold increase in power, caused him to exceed the enormous power of 200,000 pounds with a single punch. This was already over the strength of a late-stage martial artist. And this it didn't even count the blade momentum that Chu Mo had already comprehended now. If I were to utilize my blade momentum, I'm afraid that even a martial master would already be no match for me. Chapter 33 Mo Shanshan's Request, Unicorn, Jade Liquid. This day, Chu Mo was still training in the practice room. Although he had already elevated to the mid-martial artist realm and his strength had risen greatly, the way of cultivation was like rowing a boat against the water. With only the current cultivation level, it was still far from the time to slack off. A workout. It wasn't until the afternoon that Chu Mo ended up sweating profusely. After the middle stage of a martial artist, one needs to practice qi and blood. Compared to the early stage of quenching the bone marrow, the middle stage of quenching the qi and blood is much slower. It had also been a few days since he stepped into the middle stage of martial artist. Chu Mo realized that his strength growth was much slower compared to before. Of course, this was only relatively speaking. He had actually only entered a plateau in his strength growth, and while it seemed to be slow, it was actually still a steady progress. If compared to other martial artists, Chu Mo's strength growth was still extremely rapid. It was just that Chu Mo himself was not satisfied. It is said that there are also quite a few medicinal liquids in this world that can accelerate the quenching of qi and blood. Chui Lu, as a large power that spans across many bases, I think that there should be such treasures. As Chu Mo thought, he planned to go to Chui building to take a look. To be able to accelerate qi and blood quenching, there was no doubt that it would definitely be a heavy treasure of great value. If it was before, Chu Mo wouldn't have had such a backbone to buy it. But now that he had 1,000,000 yuan stones on him, plus he was still a guest secretary of the Jade Merchant Alliance, he was able to obtain preferential discounts. The bottom line was much more plentiful. After taking a bath, Chu Mo prepared to head to Chui building. Just as he went out, he saw a young martial artist standing at the door. When this person saw Chu Mo, he immediately stepped forward and bowed respectfully. "I am a martial artist from the Chui Merchant Alliance. I have met Guest Minister Chu. This time, I came here because I was ordered by Master Mo to invite Guest Minister Chu to go to the Chui building." "Miss Mo wants to see me?" Chu Mo was quite surprised. He had just wanted to go to the Jade building, but he didn't expect that Mo Shanshan would come to look for him. That said, ever since joining the Chui Merchant Alliance, other than the last time he met with Mo Shanshan at the Cultivation Martial Building because he had destroyed the house due to comprehending the blade power, they hadn't seen each other since then. This time, they suddenly wanted to see him. Could it be that something had happened? Thinking of this, Chu Mo said, "Since it is Master Mo who has invited him, Chu will go. And please lead the way. Guest Minister Chu is polite. Please follow me." This martial artist couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief when he saw Chu Mo agree. And then, he brought Chu Mo and headed towards the Chui building. Half an hour later, Chu Mo met Mo Shanshan in the Jade building. When Mo Shanshan saw Chu Mo, she was just about to speak, but suddenly seemed to sense something and couldn't help but say in shock, "Guest Minister Chu's strength seems to have increased again? I've been practicing intensely in recent times, and I've made small gains." Chu Mo said modestly. However, Mo Shanshan was truly shocked. Ever since he had gotten to know Chu Mo, almost every time they met, he could feel Chu Mo's strength grow by a large margin. Such talent and cultivation speed was simply unbelievable. If it wasn't for the fact that Mo Shanshan's own talent was also good, and that she came from a large base and had seen a lot of heavenly pride, she really would have been struck down to the bone by Chu Mo. But even so, this was enough to shock her. "But I don't know what Master Mo is looking for me for?" At that moment, Chu Mo inquired. These words also pulled Mo Shanshan back to reality from her shock. After all, she was from a great power, so she quickly calmed down and spoke the main topic. "This time, I invited you here because there is a matter that I want to ask for your help. I don't know if you're interested?" Hearing these words, Chu Mo understood that this was a mission from the Merchant Alliance coming. However, he did not immediately state his position, but instead said without moving, "Please also ask Master Mo to elaborate. It's like this. Our Jade Merchant Alliance comes from a large base and has industries in more than a dozen small bases in the surrounding area, and this time, Chongfeng Base's Jade House accidentally obtained a treasure, which I needed so much that I wanted to have this item sent to Luoyang Base. It's just that Chongfeng Base's Tsuyu House lost quite a few people in order to obtain this treasure, and is temporarily unable to escort it, and we can't trust outsiders, so we can only send someone from our Luoyang Base to fetch it." Hearing this, Chu Mo understood. To put it bluntly, it was actually equivalent to escorting a dart. Only, from Luoyang Base to Chongfeng Base, thousands of miles apart, it was very far, and during that time, one needed to pass through quite a few ferocious beasts gathering places, so it was really too dangerous to want to walk through peacefully. Mo Shanshan obviously also understood this. Therefore, she immediately said again, in order to ensure safety, our Jade House will send several martial masters to lead the team on this trip, and they will also be the main force. Although the danger still exists, the reward is also considerable. If Guest Minister Chu has the intention. Saying this, Mo Shanshan revealed a smile and said, after the matter is accomplished, you will be able to obtain 5 copies of the unicorn jade liquid from the unicorn rhinoceros. The moment these words came out, Chu Mo, who was still calm, immediately revealed a flash of essence in his eyes. The one-horned rhinoceros. It was a third-ranked ferocious beast. Its strength cannot be called how horrible, but the power is extremely horrible. It is said that the head of the unicorn can open the monument to crack the stone, extremely hard, that is, the third-order alloy sword, are very difficult to split it, and one-horned rhinoceros head of the unicorn produced by the jade liquid, is to quenching chi and blood has a miraculous effect. It was said to be able to make a martial artist's speed of quenching chi and blood accelerate by 10 times. It was because of this effect that made the one-horned rhinoceros the most perfect treasure for martial artists when quenching chi and blood. The one-horned rhinoceros did not infest the vicinity of the Luoyang base, so here, it was very difficult to find. Chu Mo never expected it. Mo Shanshan was actually able to directly open a quantity of 5. It had to be said his heart was moved. After thinking about it, Chu Mo nodded his head and said, I'm willing to participate in this mission. Although the fact that Mo Shanshan was able to come up with 5 copies of the unicorn jade liquid as payment showed the importance of this mission, no matter how big the Jade Merchant Alliance was, there was no way it could do a money-losing deal. But the unicorn jade liquid was very important to him. Having these 5 copies of the liquid would allow him to greatly shorten the time it took to quench his chi and blood. What's more, he had just accomplished his cultivation, and it was the time for him to be quiet, so he could take this opportunity to, firstly, hone his strength, and secondly, go with the team to the Changfeng base and gain some insight. Most importantly, he had a speed that was comparable to a peak martial master, so even if he encountered danger, as long as he didn't encounter an enemy at the level of a great master, he would be able to get out of the situation with ease. Because of this, he agreed to do so. Great. Hearing Chu Mo's words, a smile appeared on Mo Shanshan's face as she said, with Guest Minister Chu's help, this mission will definitely go more smoothly. Miss Mo is polite, Chu Mo will do his best. Chu Mo nodded and said. Afterward, he chatted with Mo Shanshan for a few more sentences, and only after seeing that it was going to be late in the day, did he propose to take his leave. Before leaving, Mo Shanshan also told Chu Mo that the departure time would be set 5 days later, so that he could prepare himself well during those 5 days. Chu Mo obeyed himself. Chapter 34, I disagree. This trip to Changfeng base to escort the treasure, Mo Shanshan is willing to pay such a large price, so it can be seen that this treasure is definitely extremely precious. Walking on the road back, Chu Mo secretly pondered whether the treasure was precious or not was not the focus of his concern. Even if it was precious, he wouldn't develop any greed. Although Chu Mo wasn't considered to be a merciful person, he thought that he still had some bottom line. Mo Shanshan was nice to him, her attitude was respectful, and she also answered many of Chu Mo's doubts about cultivation, so she was considered a good friend. Chu Mo naturally wouldn't do something to betray his trust for no reason. This trip is nearly 10,000 miles away, so there is bound to be a lot of danger. There is still a need to make preparations. With that in mind, Chu Mo decided to go to the supply hall tomorrow to take a stroll. The next day, Chu Mo strolled around the martial arts supply hall and procured some healing and recovery potions, as well as some items needed to survive in the wild. The following days were spent cultivating at home, waiting for the time to approach. 5 days passed by in a flash. On this day, Chu Mo arrived at the agreed location. He saw that Mo Shanshan was already waiting here, and in addition to that, there were 7 or 8 martial artists here, all of whom were participating in this escort. Chu Mo observed and found that their cultivation levels were all in the late or peak martial artist realm, and there were also a few who were martial masters. All of them were unfamiliar faces. One of them, by the looks of him, was an old man, but the aura on his body was deep, and his eyes were as sharp as a falcon's, no better than that old woman, the Zhou surname, who was a martial master following Mo Shanshan. Just as Chu Mo was observing, Mo Shanshan also noticed him and immediately came forward to greet him. The two of them simply chatted for a few moments, and one after another, there were people coming. Not a moment later. Not far away, suddenly came a murmur of discussion. Zhang Xian has come. Steward Zhang actually came as well? Good day, Steward Zhang. A group of people greeted. Zhang Xian? Chu Mo raised his eyebrows and his gaze looked over. He only saw a young martial artist walking over in a dragon's stride, with a condescending look on his face, with the attitude of not placing the people present in his eyes, and only when he faced that old martial artist did his attitude slow down slightly, salting a salty salute. This is Zhang Xian, a steward recruited by the Merchant Alliance at the Luoyang base, with a medium sword cultivation talent and inferior metallic talent, a rather rare dual attribute gifted martial artist, with strong strength, now only 20 years old. He is already at the peak martial artist realm, not far away from a martial artist, considered a rare genius. Next to him, Mo Shanshan introduced An. At that moment, Zhang Xian also saw Mo Shanshan and immediately walked over. Shanshan. Zhang Xian greeted, looking at Mo Shanshan with a scorching heat in his eyes. But then he saw Chu Mo standing beside Mo Shanshan, especially when he saw that Chu Mo's looks and temperament were not bad. He frowned without trace. Shanshan, what is this? Steward Zhang, let me introduce to you, this is Chu Mo, the guest secretary that the Merchant Alliance just recruited not long ago. Mo Shanshan introduced. Guest secretary? Hearing those words, Zhang Xian's eyes flickered as his gaze landed on Chu Mo with scrutiny in his eyes. He looked up and down before looking at Mo Shanshan and said with great meaning, Shanshan, a guest secretary isn't something that just anyone can serve as, so don't be fooled. Hearing this, Chu Mo's brows furrowed. This Xian seemed to hold some hostility towards him. As for Mo Shanshan, when she heard these words, she also had a displeased look on her face. He was just about to prepare to speak. At this time, a voice rang out in the arena. Everyone be quiet. That old martial artist stood out and attracted everyone's attention. My name is Qian Yuan, I am one of the stewards of the Jade Merchant Alliance, and I am now at the late martial master stage. Thanks to Master Mo's favor, as the leader of this operation. Everyone present, there are quite a few old men who have followed Lao Fu in several operations, and there are also quite a few newcomers who are participating for the first time. So before the operation begins, let me talk about my rules first. He coughed and said in a deep voice, in my team, firstly, no one is allowed to make any extra trouble. Second, this trip is a long way, nearly 10,000 miles round trip, and the routes in between have all been booked long ago. No one may leave the team at will, even if they encounter something, they must explain it to me first. Third, all people listen to the command, act in unity, shall not contact with outsiders at will. If you can't do the above 3 things, you can leave now. If you wait for the team to start, once you break the rules, don't blame me for being unsympathetic. This Qian Yuan martial master, at first glance, was experienced in fighting and surviving in the wilderness, and opened his mouth with a series of rules as Chu Mo listened to Qian Yuan's words. Although his face did not move, in his heart, he understood and recognized them. Survival in the wild, not the slightest bit of carelessness. These rules may seem harsh, but they can minimize the risk at this moment. There were more than 10 martial artists in the field, and after hearing this, they all expressed their approval. Seeing that the rules were set, this Qian Yuan martial master nodded his head in satisfaction. Then he asked everyone to report their strengths, so that everyone would know the overall strength of his team. Wang Qingland, early martial artist, good with swords. Ho Nan, peak martial artist, specializes in using swords. Xian Yongxing, peak martial artist, specializes in using daggers, has a weak wind attribute talent for assassination and scouting. Wu Hao, early martial master, good with shield and hammer, has a subpar earth attribute talent for defense. One by one, the martial artists reported their specialties and abilities. It was soon Zhang Xian's turn. However, he saw him with his hands behind his back and said proudly, Zhang Xian, peak martial artist, specializes in using swords, has a medium sword cultivation talent and an inferior metallic talent. Finished speaking, he also glanced at Chu Mo in a provocative manner. I heard that you are a guest secretary of the Merchant Alliance, but I don't know what strength you are nowadays. Hearing these words, Chu Mo glanced at Zhang Xian and casually said, Chu Mo, mid-martial artist, specializing in using swords. Mid-martial artist? Isn't this a joke? A mid-martial artist's strength is enough to become the Merchant Alliance's guest secretary? The point is that this mission is too dangerous, a mid-martial artist joining in as well, isn't this a liability? As Chu Mo opened his mouth, the people in the room were all of a sudden talking. A mid-martial artist was not considered weak within the base. However, in the team at hand, it could only be the bottom of the pile, not to mention that this mission was extremely dangerous. What use could a mid-martial artist be? Everyone, although guest minister Chu is only a mid-martial artist, but since he can become a guest minister, I think he should have something outstanding. Besides, letting guest secretary Chu join in doesn't affect our rewards. You guys, isn't that the reasoning? At this moment, a martial artist who hadn't spoken before said. As soon as those words came out, the others heard them and also felt that it made sense. Although Chu Mo's strength was at the bottom, after all, one less person was better than one more. Moreover, Chu Mo was still a guest minister in the Merchant Alliance. In terms of status, among those present, other than Mo Shanshan, he was the one with the highest status. It was also considered selling Chu Mo a face. Thinking of this, the crowd stopped dwelling on it and prepared to go on their way. This thought that things would end here, but who knew that just at this time, there was suddenly a piercing voice that rang out, no. The crowd subconsciously looked around at the voice. Only to see Zhang Xian standing out, saying in a deep voice, I disagree. Chapter 35, This is my bottom line. And let's not talk about how you became a guest minister when you're only at the middle martial artist realm. Let's just say right now. We are traveling across two bases, the middle of the road is long. In case we encounter a powerful beast, you are only a middle martial artist strength. If you fall into danger because of your own strength, we are to save you or not to save you. If we don't save you, that would be to see death. If we save you, wouldn't we become a drag on us? Zhang Xian stood out and looked at Chu Mo with a cold smile on his face. Originally, when he heard that Chu Mo was a guest minister, he was still quite fearful. Who knew that it was only a mid-stage martial artist, which instantly made Zhang Xian relax quite a bit. But immediately following that was jealousy. How could a mere intermediate martial artist become a guest secretary? The guest secretary of the Jade Merchant Alliance had excellent benefits and enjoyed a high degree of freedom, and their authority within the Merchant Alliance was extremely heavy. The chapters of each base only had a maximum of 2 guest secretary slots. Even he didn't have this qualification. What did Chu Mo have? The most important thing was, he had been salivating over Mo Shanshan for a long time, and in his heart, he had already treated her as his forbidden domain. And Mo Shanshan would actually talk and laugh to Chu Mo, revealing a smile that even he hadn't seen before, seemingly having a very close relationship, which naturally made him very upset. Because of this, Zhang Xian then planned to make a fool of Chu Mo in public and teach him a lesson. And when those words were said, none of the surrounding martial artists hastily opened their mouths in agreement. Anyone could see it at this moment. Zhang Xian uttering these words was clearly holding hostile intentions towards Chu Mo. And Chu Mo was the Merchant Alliance's guest secretary. His status was not ordinary. The crowd was all old, so they naturally wouldn't interrupt easily. The best thing to do was to not get involved. As for Chu Mo, at this moment, there was already unhappiness in his heart. He asked himself, and Zhang Xian did not know each other. Naturally there is no grudge, today is only the first time to meet, but the other party has repeatedly spoken out to provoke. Originally, Chu Mo, seen to Mo Shanshan's face, did not pay attention. But the mud man still has a 3-point fire. Since this is the case, Chu Mo also no longer hesitated. Raising his eyes, he looked at Zhang Xian in front of him and said in a deep voice, "Then what do you mean?" "Simple. Defeat me or gain my approval, otherwise, I will not agree to your participation in this mission." Zhang Xian said in a cold voice while holding his arms. As soon as these words came out, Mo Shanshan's face changed and huffed, "Zhang Xian, do you know what you're saying? How dare you be so rude in the face of Chu client secretary? Why don't you quickly and expeditiously retreat?" "I'm just being truthful." Zhang Xian clasped his arms and said in a cold voice, "Furthermore, for this person to become a guest minister with such a meager cultivation, I am also afraid that you, Shanshan, will be deceived." Finished speaking, he looked at Chu Mo and provoked, "How about it, do you have the guts to come forward?" "Yes." Chu Mo looked at Zhang Xian and said with a calm face. At that moment, Mo Shanshan still wanted to say something, but looking at Chu Mo's calm face, she ultimately didn't say anything. Just looking at Zhang Xian, who still had a proud face, she silently sighed. Although Zhang Xian's realm strength seemed high and he had dual talents in his possession, however, compared to Chu Mo, who had already comprehended the blade momentum, he was still not good enough. The only thing that would happen to him would be a crushing defeat. This place had a lot of space. The crowd dispersed, giving Chu Mo and Zhang Xian an open space for them to exchange blows. Zhang Xian drew out his own blade, but it was an alloy longsword that looked sharp. And on its body, it even carried an aura of sharpness that made one's eyes feel raw just by looking at it. Steward Zhang is endowed with a medium-grade sword talent, and is quite notable in his attainments with the sword, and is also blessed with a metallic talent, which can make the sword weapon even sharper, making it much more powerful, so it can be said to be like a tiger adding its wings. And it is rumored that not long ago, Steward Zhang has already reached the sword light realm, and with a single sword chop, the sword aura is so rampant that even ordinary martial masters wouldn't dare to swipe at their sharp edges. Guest Minister Chu is only at the mid-martial master realm, I'm afraid. The surrounding martial artists murmured. In their words, they did not express hope that Chu Mo would be able to defeat Zhang Xian. It wasn't that they were mindlessly mocking Chu Mo. It was mainly because they understood Zhang Xian better and knew what kind of cards and strength Zhang Xian had. As for Chu Mo, they did not understand. They could only rely on the strength they were currently displaying and make guesses. "Kid, I don't know where you got the nerve to accept my challenge. But today, you will definitely lose." Listening to the comments around him, Zhang Xian was quite proud of himself. After releasing these harsh words, his face suddenly condensed as he said in a deep voice, "Watch the move." The words fell. Zhang Xian's figure moved quickly, holding a long sword as he lunged towards Chu Mo. The sword aura was awe-inspiring, cold light flashed, carrying the sound of air-breaking whistling. It seemed like it could even cut through the air. Seeing this sword, the surrounding martial artists were all slightly discolored. Based on the power of this sword alone, even an early-stage martial master would not dare to resist it and could only dodge. And in the face of such horrifying power, Chu Mo, who bore the brunt of the attack, remained motionless. It was as if he was completely stunned. What is he doing? Why isn't he moving? If he doesn't dodge, he'll die under this sword. The onlookers, watching Chu Mo actually not making the slightest movement, couldn't help but cry out in shock as for the stabbing Zhang Xian. Looking at Chu Mo, who hadn't moved a single bit, the corners of his eyes even revealed a smear of killing intent. "You want to seek death, then you can't blame me." Thinking of this, Zhang Xian put his heart across. The sword chi in his hand actually rose 3 times again, quite a tendency to kill Chu Mo with a sword. All of this was a long story, but in reality, it was an instant. At this moment, the sword has come to the place 3 feet in front of his body. seeing that Chu Mo was going to die under the sword, right at this moment. Chu Mo finally moved. In the midst of everyone's incredulous gazes, he actually did not dodge, did not draw his own weapon, and instead directly probed out his right hand, grabbing Zhang Xian's incoming longsword. With a body of flesh and blood, he grabbed the sharpness of the sword weapon. Break! A low cry was uttered, but it emitted a terrifying tremor like the roar of a dragon or elephant, and the air was agitated as layers of it cracked open at this instant. Chu Mo's tendons and bones around his body resounded in unison, a layer of purple electric arcs lingered on top of his palms, and the entire person seemed to be transformed into a Taiku thunder god, and the rigid and casteless force burst out from his entire body, pouring into his spine and driving his entire body, rushing towards his right hand as if he were a shocking wave. Kaching! A crisp sound resounded in the ears of everyone present. Amidst the unbelieving gazes of the crowd, Zhang Xian's alloy longsword was unexpectedly pinched off hard, cracking into countless pieces and shooting out. "You're asking me where my backbone is, dash." Chu Mo raised his head, the corner of his mouth hooked up in an arc. "This my bottom line." Silence. Deadly silence. Beneath the silence was Zhang Xian's frozen smile. This frozen smile gradually dissipated, and in its place was a face full of shock. "You." Zhang Xian still wanted to say something. However, when the words reached his mouth and he was just about to open his mouth, he suddenly saw the alloy longsword hanging from Chu Mo's waist steeply sheath itself by half an inch in an instant, an extremely strong blade aura impacted. Without the slightest ability to resist, Zhang Xian's entire person suddenly flew backwards. In the air, only plop 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 could be heard, and his entire body was slashed by the blade chi. By the time he fell to the ground, he had already turned into a bloody man. A mere minuscule cultivation, truly unaware of what's going on. Chu Mo caressed the hilt of his sword with his hand and said in a faint voice. In the distance. Zhang Xian, who had already been attacked by the blade chi and was deeply and seriously injured, had wanted to say something, but after hearing these words, he couldn't help but become furious and spit out a mouthful of blood with a poof. Afterwards, his breathing stagnated and he directly fainted. Such an outcome. It completely shook everyone. Chapter 36, A Martial Artist Cannot Be Humiliated, Broken White Weasel. The meridians are broken by inches, and he has become an invalid. Afterwards a medic came forward to treat Zhang Xian, but after a meticulous examination, it was discovered that Zhang Xian's entire body had been invaded by the blade chi, and his meridians had been broken by inches, making him an invalid. In a fight between martial artists, injuries were unavoidable. Not to mention that Zhang Xian had repeatedly provoked Chu Mo, and even tried to kill him during the fight, which had already touched the bottom line. A martial artist could not be humiliated. Chu Mo did not kill him, only abolished his cultivation, already considered mercy. Therefore, after learning of this result, the crowd did not have any pity for Zhang Xian, only showing regret. And for Chu Mo, they revealed appreciation as well as respect. Respect for the strong. In the previous fight, Chu Mo had only struck twice as swiftly as lightning, but it was this glimpse that made them remember it vividly. The first time. Flesh and blood, hard grip on the sharpness of the sword weapon. Directly crushing the alloy longsword. And the second time. It was when the longsword was sheathed by half an inch, and a terrifying blade aura erupted out, seriously injuring Zhang Xian. The power contained in the two strikes was no less than that of an early martial master. How could this not call out to them that their hearts were shocked, but at the same time, respect was born? No wonder he can be listed as a guest minister at the mid-martial master realm. He really is not an ordinary person. All of them secretly thought in their hearts. And at this time, Mo Shanshan also came forward and apologized to Chu Mo for Zhang Xian's provocation. Chu Mo naturally wouldn't dwell on the matter. As for Zhang Xian, he had already been carried down by the medical staff to heal his wounds. He could not die. But if there were no accidents, it was estimated that he could only become an ordinary person in this life. This was just a small episode. Half an hour later, everyone was fully loaded and ready to go, and under the escort of Mo Shanshan, they rushed towards the outside of the base. A line of teams. There were 15 people in total. Among them were 4 martial masters, 1 late martial master, and 3 were all early martial masters. Of the remaining people, other than Chu Mo, they were all at the late or peak martial master realm. Chu Mo followed the group forward. Everyone didn't dare to underestimate him, instead, they treated him as a powerful martial master. The team's traveling speed wasn't slow, and soon they were already far away from the Luoyang base. Chu Mo followed the team forward while looking around. At this time, it was exactly noon. The sunlight spilled down and shone on the earth. Countless tall trees and intertwined vines grew all over, making it seem as if one was in the middle of a barbaric ancient forest. The civilizations and huge cities that people were proud of had all been covered. Except for the bases that could still be seen, no trace could be found in the wilderness. This is the greatness of nature. Even Chu Mo, after seeing this, couldn't help but feel awe in his heart. Soon, it was night. Before nightfall, the team opened a campground to rest on the spot. It was worth mentioning. Qian Yuan's experience in the wilderness was indeed very rich. Under his leadership, this day, the team did not encounter any danger at all, and even if there was a gathering of ferocious beasts in front of them, they were able to bypass them far before the beasts realized it. If they really couldn't go around, with the strength of their team, they were able to kill the beasts in front of them. Although the rush time was slower, and they had only traveled more than 1,000 miles in a day, it was safer. Early in the morning of the second day, they quickly set off before dawn. Then near nighttime, they set up camp on the spot, and it was like this for a few days in a row. Soon, it was already the 4th day. At this time, they were less than a day's journey away from Chongfeng base, and would arrive tomorrow. Perhaps it was because they were about to arrive at their destination, or perhaps it was because the long period of calmness had caused the crowd to be more or less slack. Suddenly, poof! A martial artist slightly fell behind, and not far away there was a sudden gust of wind whistling past. This martial artist only had time to stifle a grunt, and then the whole person's body trembled, and in the next moment it exploded, turning into a cloud of blood mist and dissipated. This movement also attracted everyone's attention. What's going on? How did Honan suddenly die? He's at the peak martial artist realm, how could he just die like that? What the hell is going on here? I just seemed to have seen a white shadow sweeping in fast, only before I had time to react, I saw that shadow slam into Honan's body, and then a martial artist was trembling, not knowing if it was because of fear or because he regretted not coming to the rescue at that time. Chu Mo also gripped the hilt of his sword with a grave expression. Vigilantly, he looked around. Calm down. Stay alert. At this moment, Qian Yuan called out loudly to calm everyone down. He then stood in place with a solemn expression, first looking at the place where Honan was originally standing, and then sniffed carefully before his face suddenly changed. Not good. This is the skybreaking white weasel. Ah. As soon as his words fell, there was another tragic scream on the other side. A martial artist's body trembled steeply when he couldn't catch up with his defenses, and then it exploded. This time the crowd was alert, and with a startled glance, they finally saw that it was a ferocious beast covered in white. This thing has a slender torso, short limbs, narrow head shape, the body size is not big, only about 1 meter, but the tail is very long, the 2 front paws are like a person, long 5 fingers, nails are sharp to the extreme, silver light, like metal. When discovered, this ferocious beast, half of the body in mid-air, while the other half disappeared, as if it had vanished into the void. In fact, it was exactly the same. The skybreaking white weasel was a 3rd-grade medium ferocious beast. Its strength was not that powerful. But the key lies in the fact that this kind of beast is extremely fast and is able to travel through space, grasping a trace of the power of space. It could be described as a god. Once one was targeted by it, it was impossible to have a chance of escaping with one's life. Even if it was a martial arts master who encountered it, it would still be extremely troublesome and right now. This team of theirs was actually being targeted by the sky-breaking white weasel, and for a moment, everyone's faces were pale and bloodless. What's the point of panicking? Xian Yuan shouted loudly and then said, it's just a third-grade medium ferocious beast, as long as we don't let it find a break and break us down one by one, we still have a chance. Everyone listen to my order, all gather around, once we find this sky-breaking white weasel appearing, immediately swarm around it, don't keep your hands off. Listening to Qian Yuan's call, everyone then quickly gathered together. All of them were leaning back to back, staring very nervously at the void in front of them. Whoosh! Not a moment later, another air-breaking sound resounded steeply. The sky-breaking white weasel once again broke through the void and arrived in front of a martial master in the group, its two claws probing out, wanting to decapitate him. Die for me. This martial artist waved his long sword and slashed. However, his speed was still much slower. The martial artist didn't even hit the sky-breaking white weasel. Instead, the white weasel directly grabbed onto this martial artist's chest and casually pulled out a bloody heart. And at this time, the other martial artists then reacted, and swung their swords in unison, to slash over. But after scoring a hit, the ferret once again relied on its speed to dodge, and then quickly disappeared into the void. Chapter 37, Teasing, a Knife. A tense atmosphere. It spread in everyone's hearts. That sky-breaking white weasel, divine. Every time it appeared, it would cause a martial artist to die tragically. In a short period of time, 6 people had already died. Among these 6 people, there were peak martial artists and early-stage martial artists, all of them were strong in the base, but here, they were powerless and could only die in an agonizing manner. Even the murderer could not see what he looked like. Everyone's hearts and minds were terrified, and they couldn't help but let out violent gasps, which seemed exceptionally clear in this environment. I can't take it anymore. Go die. Go to hell. A martial artist couldn't stand such a depressing atmosphere, and even hissed and rushed out of the crowd, waving his long sword and swinging it around. While swinging, he yelled, "Come out! You come out! Suhao, don't be impulsive, come back!" Seeing him like this, a martial artist couldn't help but turn pale and roar loudly. But it was still too late. A white shadow suddenly appeared out of nowhere, charging straight towards Suhao. The white sharp claws passed through the body in a flash. Suhao's body stiffened, and he directly fell to the ground without moving. Obviously, he was already dead. Only, what passed over his face was relief. A cat catching a mouse. It is trying to play us to death one by one. Xian Yuan said in a deep voice, with an iron face. The sky-breaking white weasel did not quickly break them down one by one, but instead killed one person at intervals, no doubt wanting them to experience death in fear. Understanding this, everyone's hearts were unusually heavy. Chu Mo was also alarmed. This sky-breaking white weasel moved like electricity, its speed was extremely fast, and even he only saw a shadow. I also don't know if I can catch it with my speed so that I can behead it. Chu Mo thought so in his heart. At this time, everyone held their breath under the meaning. The wilderness only had the sound of slightly blowing winds ringing out, but in such a situation, it was even more of a silence. Silence too. Everyone could hear the heartbeat of their own chest. I don't know how long passed. Another air-breaking sound resounded steeply. The crowd only saw a white shadow shoot out and crash towards the crowd. Watch out! This ferocious beast is here again! Xian Yuan shouted loudly. As he spoke, his eyes looked over and he only saw this ferocious beast pounce headlong into the crowd, aiming at a martial artist. And this person was Chu Mo. The ferret's speed was extremely fast, so fast that the naked eye couldn't even see it. And Chu Mo bore the brunt of it. Under his gaze, he was able to clearly see the ferret's claws reaching over like lightning, and it was about to stab into his heart area. Luo smoke step. Chu Mo activated his wind attribute talent, and 15 times his speed was instantly energized, while simultaneously executing the Luo smoke steps. The entire person narrowly dodged in the nick of time. At the same time, clang! A sword sound of gold and iron suddenly rang out from the arena. It pierced into everyone's eardrums. The alloy battle sword in Chu Mo's hand was violently sheathed, and the pizzicato blade chi came out across the sky, unexpectedly coming out afterward and chopping out at an incredible speed. In an instant, infinite blade momentum filled the surroundings, and a snowy cold aura surged into everyone's vision. The swaying of the tree's shadows, the blowing of the breeze, the shining of the sun, the shouts of the people around them, and the breaking sound of the broken ferret. Everything. None of it was as dazzling, eye-catching, and gorgeous as this blade. The saber chi swept, wrapped in peerless might. When this blade cut out, the battle blades in the hands of all the martial artists in the entire arena unanimously emitted a buzzing sound. Plop! Accompanied by the sound of the long blade entering the flesh, resounded steeply. This blade accurately pierced into the body of the skybreaking white weasel. It was injured. Time seemed to freeze at this moment. Chu Mo was even able to see the originally playful eyes of the skybreaking white weasel abruptly freeze, replaced by eyes full of consternation and fear, as if in doubt as to why this human in front of him was able to capture its speed and why he was able to execute such a fast knife. Because of this doubt, it froze for a moment. Although the time of freezing was less than a second. But this was already enough. Chu Mo's face was expressionless, and as he exerted force on his hand, the long knife slashed down the ferret's body. Clatter! A large amount of blood spilled down like pouring rain. The body of the ferret fell to the ground. It seemed to want to struggle for a moment, but its body was slashed through a large hole, and the violent blade chi rushed into its body, completely shattering its vitality. A few moments later, it finally gagged completely. Third-grade medium ferocious beast, broken white ferret, dead. It died? The white weasel that was quite troublesome for even martial arts masters to cope with, died just like that? Looking at the ferret's corpse, everyone was somewhat incredulous. One moment, they were still in despair, as if they were rats being teased by the sky-breaking white weasel, and could only wait for death to come. And in the next second, this ferocious beast had become a corpse. Such a strong contrast made everyone feel a sense of unreality. It was as if they were in a dream. It wasn't until a long time later that they came back to their senses, believing in the scene they saw before them. But immediately afterward, they then remembered Chu Mo who had decapitated this ferret, and for a time, everyone bet their eyes on Chu Mo's body. Colors of reverence and awe flowed from their eyes. Just now, Chu Mo's sweeping slash had dazzled everyone. Even in retrospect at this moment, one could still feel the incomparable might contained in that blade. Overbearing. Unstoppable. It was invincible. It was hard to look at. No words could describe the terror of this blade. No words could praise the stunning nature of this blade. There was nothing but shock in their hearts. Previously, Chu Mo's clean defeat of Zhang Xian had only allowed them to see that Chu Mo's strength was not as low as it was before their eyes, and that he was worthy of the position of guest secretary, but no one had expected it. Chu Mo's strength was unexpectedly as strong as this. Truly terrifying. Such a slash, if I were to encounter it. Many people subconsciously brought themselves into the position of the sky-breaking white weasel in their hearts, and then realized with horror that they were simply unable to resist it. Even Qian Yuan. After pondering for a moment in his mind, a look of gravity appeared on his face. This slash he also didn't dare to resist it, and could only avoid it. But how terrifying is this? To be able to pose a threat to him at the late martial master stage, at the mid-martial master stage, if it was said, I'm afraid that everyone would think that it was simply a fantasy. But the truth was right in front of them. Many thanks to Lord Chu Mo for saving their lives. These martial artists expressed their gratitude respectfully. It was even Qian Yuan, who also walked over and solemnly shouted Chu Hakiai in an extremely respectful manner. It wasn't just because Chu Mo had saved their lives. It was even more because of Chu Mo's strength. It was so powerful that it made their hearts fold for it. Prior to that, when Chu Mo had only displayed the strength of an early martial master, they were still able to call Chu Mo their brother. But now that they saw that Chu Mo's strength was so terrifying, and that his future was bound to be unlimited, they naturally became much more restrained. Everyone doesn't need to be so restrained. Looking at everyone who was somewhat unable to let go, Chu Mo smiled and said, "We've gone through crises together, it's also considered a friendship of sharing the same life and death, there's no need to be like this. Since that's the case, old me, Su Chong, you shattered, so I'll dare to call you old brother Chu." Hearing Chu Mo say that, Qian Yuan laughed. The others also gradually relaxed when they saw that Chu Mo was still in his original character. Chapter 38, Fusing Spatial Talents. Once the skybreaking white weasel died, the team's crisis was lifted. The people worked together to bury these companions who had died tragically, and if their bodies had disappeared, they set up a clothing grave, and simply toasted a cup of wine and water, and then the people continued on their way after some repairs. As for the body of the air-breaking ferret, it naturally belonged to Chu Mo. This hollow-breaking white weasel had a spatial talent that Chu Mo wanted to collect. But at this time, because he still had to rush, he put it in his storage bag for now, and waited to settle down before disposing of it. The team traveled forward. Perhaps because of such a crisis, the road thereafter was relatively silent, and vigilance was greatly increased. Luckily, the rest of the road did not encounter any crises. In the evening of that day, before nightfall was about to come, they finally arrived at their destination, the Changfeng base. Finally arrived. The moment they stepped inside the base, everyone, including Chu Mo, couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. "Steward Qian, you guys have finally arrived." At that moment, a few martial artists at the city gates immediately came forward to greet Qian Yuan upon seeing him. These people were the Tsuyu building personnel of Changfeng base. "It's old son, haven't seen you for many years, you have also become a martial master?" When Qian Yuan saw the martial artist at the head, he was immediately happy and greeted him eagerly. "It's just a fluke breakthrough, I guess I'll reach the martial master realm in this lifetime." The martial artist surnamed Sun said modestly, but his face still revealed a touch of happiness that was hard to hide. After exchanging a few pleasantries, the martial artist surnamed Sun asked, "Have you encountered any dangers on this journey over here?" Hearing this, Qian Yuan sighed, "Don't mention it, on the way, we encountered a broken white ferret, and several of our brethren died, but fortunately we survived. Old son, quickly arrange a place for us to stay, rushing all the way over here, we're all exhausted to death." Qian Yuan vaguely prevaricated and did not elaborate. Chu Mo listened on the side and knew that this was Qian Yuan keeping his secret. Now that he was only in the middle stage of martial arts, he was able to kill a third-grade medium ferocious beast with a spatial talent, the hollow-breaking white weasel. If this was spread out, it would certainly make him famous, but it would likewise cause many people to be prying and scornful. There might be people who would privately lay hands on Chu Mo, and even if the possibility of that was slim to none, it was still necessary to take precautions. Qian Yuan was an old man and naturally understood this. This was Qian Yuan's protection for him, and Chu Mo was grateful in his heart. And when the martial artist surnamed Sun heard this, he was also greatly shocked. He just saw that Qian Yuan didn't want to go into details, so he didn't ask any further questions, but immediately brought them back to the Chuyu building, arranging for them to stay in the rooms that had been prepared long ago. In the evening, after everyone had washed up in their rooms, they went to attend the banquet arranged by Martial Master Sun. At the dinner table, the crowd pushed their cups and exchanged drinks, enjoying a rare moment of tranquility. Chu Mo ate silently, and after a few moments of being full, he spoke to everyone and took the lead in leaving the venue. Martial Master Sun only thought that Chu Mo was an ordinary martial artist, so he didn't care. Back inside his own house, Chu Mo washed his face and took out the corpse of the skybreaker white weasel from his storage bag. This was a ferocious beast that possessed a spatial talent. When he encountered it earlier in the wilderness, the other party relied on shuttling through space, which could be described as a godly maneuver, giving Chu Mo a deep impression. If it wasn't for the fact that he possessed a speed of 5 times the speed of sound, coupled with comprehending the blade momentum, he had caught the ferret and killed it. I'm afraid that all of them would have died there. Without a doubt. This was a very heaven-defying talent. If Chu Mo was able to obtain this talent through gathering, his strength would definitely increase completely. It just so happened that the cooldown time for the gathering talent had also passed, and it was completely possible to do so. At the thought of this, even Chu Mo couldn't help but feel excited without the slightest hesitation. He directly stretched out his palm and touched over towards the corpse of the Skybreaker White Weasel, while silently reciting in his heart, "Gather." The next moment, the golden palm appeared out of thin air and fished around the corpse. When in came back, there was a golden orb. The orb was only the size of a quail's egg, which contained an extremely mysterious and special flavor, and at a glance, it was as if one was facing the supreme truth of heaven and earth directly, causing one to not feel dizziness and a foggy brain. Acquisition successful. Acquired secondary spatial talent. Please ask if it's fused? Success. Seeing this line of prompts, Chu Mo's heart suddenly jumped. Fusion. Without hesitation, he said. Along with the fall of his words. Boom. The golden orb directly shattered and turned into dots of fluorescent light that surged into Chu Mo's mind in an instant. Intense pain surfaced in all parts of his body. The intensity of the pain was even more terrifying than when Chu Mo fused the higher blade technique talent. It was so terrifying that Chu Mo was almost instantly about to faint. It was simply impossible to describe it with words. If one had to compare it, it was more like a ball of steel wire, constantly rubbing on Chu Mo's soul, cutting and scratching his soul into pieces. His body trembled. Cold sweat overflowed. Drops of sweat flowed down from his body, soaking his clothes and even the floor underneath him, as if he had just come out of the water. This fusion took a long time. So long that Chu Mo had already forgotten the flow of time. It was hard to know how long time passed. The pain finally began to slowly disappear, and the fusion gradually ended. Very quickly. All the negative effects completely receded. Phew. Chu Mo directly sat paralyzed on the ground, panting heavily. He no longer had the strength to be standing up. Too terrifying. It really deserves to be called a spatial talent that is known as one of the 2 supreme talents alongside the time talent. Just a sub-level talent fusion has caused me so much pain that it's almost difficult for me to support myself. Chu Mo thought with some palpitations. A full half-hour had passed before Chu Mo felt some of his strength had been restored and strongly supported himself to stand up. The first time he checked his information. Target, Chu Mo. Physique, higher cultivation physique. Talent, higher blade cultivation talent, medium wind attribute talent, lower thunder attribute talent, subpar space talent. Finally, looking at the new talent that appeared on the talent list, Chu Mo wiped the sweat from his forehead. His pain hadn't been in vain. It was all worth it. Experience the ability of the spatial talent. Chu Mo couldn't wait to try it out after fusing the spatial talent. Chu Mo already knew the abilities he could master. There were 2 main types. One of them was having spatial perception abilities. Within a certain range, he was able to sense the situation around him, but whenever there was any movement of the wind, even if it was even the flow of yuan qi, or even the breathing of the grass and trees, it could be captured by him keenly, and it was so hidden that it wouldn't be detected. The second was to break through the void. The body disappears into the void and can appear in any area it can perceive. To put it simply, it is instantaneous movement. Chapter 39, The Weirdness of Chongfeng Base. Chu Mo catalyzed his spatial talent. In an instant, it felt as if his mind seemed to break free from his body, and a nearby area of 50 meters in circumference appeared as if it was a projection in the heart lake. He could feel the fluctuations of any of the spatial nodes within this area. It seemed like everything was under his grasp. Chu Mo knew that this was the spatial perception ability obtained after mastering the spatial talent. With such a perception, Chu Mo could then move his body with his mind and break through the void, arriving anywhere within the range of his perception. Thinking like this, Chu Mo marked a location in his mind. The next moment, his body then instantly disappeared, while almost simultaneously appearing in another location. Its speed was so fast that even Chu Mo himself didn't react. It's really worthy of a spatial talent, it's really as strong as it is. After personally experiencing it, a smile appeared on Chu Mo's face. Right now, he wasn't very familiar with the instantaneous shift and spatial perception abilities yet, however, he understood very well just how significant these two abilities were to martial artists. First was spatial perception. A range of 50 meters in a radius was under control. This also meant that from now on, no wind or grass could be hidden from his perception. Even if it was a sneak attack, as long as it entered this range, it would be detected by him and thus easily dodged. And breaking through the void, it was even a better choice for escaping. If he encountered an enemy that was difficult to defend against, he could completely hide in the void and defend himself. At the same time, one could also instantly appear behind the enemy and counterattack. It was said to be invincible. Even Chu Mo couldn't help but suck in a breath of cool air when he thought of the scenario of utilizing his spatial talent against the enemy. This is still only an inferior spatial talent. If one could master a higher level spatial talent, how powerful would it be? And as one of the two supreme talents, the time talent, which is said to be even more heaven-defying than the spatial talent, what kind of terrifying abilities should it have? Chu Mo thought rather curiously, but, for the moment, he hadn't seen anyone who could master the spatial talent in the Luoyang base. And the time talent was even more unheard of. Early the next morning, Qian Yuan followed Martial Master Sun to Chuiyu Building to take the treasures that needed to be brought back on this trip. Chu Mo didn't need to be in charge of this and was happy to be free. Therefore, after greeting him, he went out on the street on his own, intending to see the local customs here. Before the great change of heaven and earth, Luoyang and Changfeng were actually very close to each other, separated by only 100 miles, but with the blue star expanding hundreds of times, the distance between the two places was also constantly pulling away, and the straight-line distance alone had reached thousands of miles, and there were mountains and forests along the way to block the way. This was also the proximity of many bases. If not for powerful martial artists, many people could only end up within their own bases for the rest of their lives. Just after strolling around the streets, Chu Mo discovered a very strange thing. Changfeng base was said to be a bit more populated and slightly stronger than Luoyang base. It was reasonable to say Changfeng base would be safer. But Chu Mo saw along the way, found that all the residents here had panicked faces. It is the martial artists, but also most of them are in a hurry, face solemn. The entire base seemed to be haunted by a layer of uneasy atmosphere. Chu Mo was puzzled. He was planning to probe for some information. But just at this moment, there are ferocious beasts. Fierce beasts have broken in. Run, run. Ah! On the street in front, many ordinary people shouted with terrified faces, while desperately seeming to run towards the outside. Because there were too many people. Coupled with panic, it led to a stampede. Many people fell to the ground, and before they could get up, they were trampled on by the pedestrians running behind them. And behind the crowd, a ferocious beast with a huge body was ravaging the streets at this time, buildings collapsing with a slap of its hand, and countless ordinary people were killed or injured under its attacks. Some martial artists still wanted to resist. However, this ferocious beast was powerful and exuded the aura of a third-level ferocious beast. When ordinary martial artists faced it, they could not do anything at all, and instead, they were even slapped to death by the ferocious beast one after another. Seeing such a situation, Chu Mo immediately froze. Then with a flash of his body, he suddenly rushed up. Ah! Mom! A little girl sat on the ground, crying out and looking around, trying to find her mom. Unbeknownst to her, the ferocious beast had already pounced over, with a hideous look on its face, wanting to crush this little biddy to death. The little girl was about to lose her life under the ferocious beast's attack. It was worth the close call. Sinful beast. In the midst of the violent shout, a cold light was abruptly born. It seemed to be a sharp blade that cut through the sky, directly blasting at the ferocious beast. Originally, the ferocious beast was still majestic. By this attack, the entire body directly flew backwards, and when it fell to the ground, its breath had already withered, and its mouth emitted sounds of sadness. Chu Mo landed on the ground and slowly stepped forward with his sword. The beast looked at Chu Mo, constantly forward, the body, and then constantly retreat, but hissed in the mouth, to send out a threatening voice. In the end, when it saw that it couldn't scare Chu Mo, it actually twisted its head, intending to escape. But how could Chu Mo let it run away? The wind attribute talent activated, and in an instant, it arrived in front of the ferocious beast, and then without hesitation, he chopped down with a blade. Pfft! Blood splattered, the ferocious beast didn't even have the slightest power to resist and directly perished. The crisis was lifted. Chu Mo came in front of the little girl and just planned to comfort her. Yuan Yuan, my Yuan Yuan. At this time, a woman with a panicked look ran over, seeing the little girl, immediately pounced over and held her in her arms. Yuan Yuan, you can scare me to death, are you hurt? Mom, I'm fine. The little girl also stopped crying at this time, said in a milky voice, it was this brother who saved me. Upon hearing this, the woman then noticed Chu Mo and hurriedly expressed her gratitude. Thank you, this martial artist lord, thank you for saving my family. Yuan Yuan, if it wasn't for you, I really don't know what to do. A show of hands. Chu Mo waved his hand and said, it's still quite chaotic here, quickly take the child and go home. Yes, 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 we'll go back now. The woman nodded her head repeatedly, then thanked her again before leaving in a panic with the little girl. Brother, goodbye. Before the little girl left, she also waved her hand at Chu Mo. Chu Mo also cast the same smile. Just. When he turned around, his smile gradually tightened. At this time, there was already a vigilante team that had rushed over and was packing up the aftermath and treating the injured. Chu Mo didn't meet up with them, and just collected the materials and ferocious beast blood before leaving the place. On the way back, Chu Mo's mind constantly floated with a question. Changfeng Base, what exactly happened? First, there was the uneasy atmosphere that lingered throughout the entire base. Then there were ferocious beasts breaking in. All the signs indicated that this place was unusual. Since the great change in heaven and earth, humans have relied on martial artists to gradually establish various survival bases. After so many years of development, although the overall strength is still not as good as the ferocious beasts, it is no longer a soft target. No ferocious beasts exceeding level 2 would appear within 10 miles of any survival base, and no level 3 or above ferocious beasts would appear within 50 miles. Once discovered, they would inevitably be cleared instantly. The base, in turn, had a tall and thick fence, plus there were also patrols of martial artists guarding it. It can be said, as long as this base was still functioning normally, it was simply impossible for the ferocious beasts to rush in. But now, within the Changfeng base, there were actually ferocious beasts rampaging. This was simply unbelievable. What on earth has happened? Chu Mo thought secretly in his heart. Chapter 40, The Return Journey. Returning to the Chuyu building, he just happened to see Qian Yuan and Martial Master Sun talking. Chu Mo, you're back. Qian Yuan greeted with a smile. The attitude was very warm. While Sun Mo sure looked on, in his heart, he was secretly searching. This Chu Mo in front of him was so young and thought that his strength shouldn't be very strong, but Qian Yuan's attitude towards him was very cordial. Could it be that this Chu Mo was a son or nephew of old brother Qian's family? Thinking like this, martial artist Sun couldn't help but ask. While hearing this, Qian Yuan was crying and laughing. Old brother Sun, you are overestimating. If I, Qian Yuan, could have a son or nephew like this, I'm afraid I would wake up laughing in my dreams. These words made Sun Wushu puzzled. Fortunately, Qian Yuan didn't sell the story and directly explained, "It's also my fault that I didn't introduce you. This is actually our Luoyang base Chui Yulu's guest secretary, Chu Mo. Don't look young now, but it's already a mid-stage martial artist. It can be considered a true heavenly pride." The words were full of esteem. "So it's guest secretary Chu." Martial Master Sun stood in awe. He didn't know how exactly Chu Mo's strength was, but just hearing that Chu Mo was able to become a guest minister, he knew that it was extremely extraordinary. As an old man in the Chuiyu building, Sun Mo sure understood very well in his heart. To become a guest secretary of the Jade Merchant Alliance, what harsh conditions were needed? Either one was strong, at least at the level of a grandmaster. Either that, or they were extremely talented and had a bright future ahead of them. For Chu Mo to be able to become a guest secretary at only the middle stage of martial arts, it could be seen how extraordinary his natural talent was. "Elder brother Qian is too much of a favor, I'm really ashamed of it," Chu Mo said with a smile. After saying that, he also greeted Sun Emosher and exchanged a few pleasantries. Seeing that Chu Mo didn't have the slightest stance, Sun Emosher's heart also rose with the idea of friendship. So the more the three of them talked, the more cordial the atmosphere became, and they soon hit it off while talking. Chu Mo thought about the unusual nature of Changfeng Base, and thought that since Sun Emosher had lived here for so many years, he thought that he should know something about it, so he inquired about the doubts in his heart. "There is still this?" When Qian Yuan heard this, he was also filled with surprise and asked, "Elder brother Sun, what is going on here?" "It's a long story." Originally full of smiles, Martial Master Sun could not help but let out a sigh after hearing this. He then recounted the original story. A month ago, the ferocious beasts in the vicinity of Changfeng Base had suddenly become unusually active for some unknown reason. Even many of the ferocious beasts that originally lived in the dense forests had frequently ventured out, and had even broken into the vicinity of the base many times. Such a turn of events caused the Changfeng Base's senior management to pay attention in order to find out what was going on. The base sent out martial artists many times to probe, trying to figure out the source of the ferocious beast's strange movements. Many of the martial artists who were sent out basically went out and couldn't come back. Those who were able to return were also unable to find out any useful information. As time passed, the ferocious beast's movements became more and more frequent, which made all the base executives a bit uneasy, thinking that they couldn't wait like this any longer. So they decided to spill out all the martial artists and conduct large-scale probing, making sure to figure out the reason as soon as possible, so as to make a course of response. Speaking of this, Martial Master Sun shook his head and lamented, "Because of this, nowadays, all of the high-end combatants within the base have been drawn out. Originally there were 6 Grand Masters, but nowadays there is only one left who is still sitting within the base, and the other 5 have all gone out. As for the martial masters and martial artists, they've all been pulled out of most of their manpower as well, which has led to a severe shortage in the number of martial artists in Changfeng Base right now. Coupled with the fact that ferocious beasts are frequently popping up, so they often break through the blockade area and enter the base." Listening to this explanation, Qian Yuan then came to a realization and lamented, "I hope that we can find the root cause as soon as possible." "Who says it isn't? If it keeps going on like this, even martial artists won't dare to go out hunting." Martial Master Sun concurred. Chu Mo did not say anything. For some reason, his heart was heavy. Although Changfeng Base didn't seem to have any abnormalities right now, Chu Mo was keenly aware that something was wrong. After struggling to survive for so long in the last days of his previous life, Chu Mo knew very well. When things go wrong, there must be a demon. And right now, these ferocious beasts were suddenly moving around a lot, so there was bound to be something going on. And once it appeared, it was definitely something big. Chu Mo could see this. He didn't believe that the higher-ups in the base wouldn't see it. Perhaps it was precisely because the higher-ups had already anticipated the seriousness of the matter that they had directly dispersed the 5 sect masters and most of the martial artists in the base to investigate the situation. In that case, I'm afraid that Changfeng Base is already somewhat unsafe. Chu Mo secretly thought in his heart. Fortunately, they would be able to return to Luoyang base today. It was still quite safe there only. Although Luoyang base was thousands of miles away from Changfeng base, it was still not absolutely safe and might be affected. Strength. The most important thing is still strength. We must raise our strength up as soon as possible, only then can we have the power to defend ourselves in the face of any danger. When we return to the Luoyang base, we will immediately go into seclusion and strive to step into the martial master realm in the shortest possible time. Afternoon. Qian Yuan brought the treasures to be escorted and prepared to return. Martial Master Sun personally sent them to the gate of the base and watched their group leave. When they went back, they still followed the same path. Compared to when they came, going back was much smoother. Without encountering the sky-breaking white weasel, the team never suffered any deaths or injuries. Several days later, the team finally returned to the neighborhood of Luoyang base. Some martial artists who were out hunting could already be seen occasionally in the jungle, and everyone's mood was much lighter, not as tense as when they had just returned soon. The team had entered the base and returned inside the Chuiyu building. Mo Shanshan had long been waiting. It was only after Qian Yuan placed the escorted treasures that everyone let out a complete sigh of relief. Everyone has worked hard on this trip to Changfeng base. I already know about the matter as well. Please rest assured that those who were killed or injured will be given compassionate treatment, and all of your rewards will be increased as well. Mo Shanshan pacified. Hearing this, the spirits of the people were all slightly uplifted as they said, "Many thanks, Master Mo." With the mission completed, the team disbanded on their own. These martial artists were all subordinates of the Jade Merchant Alliance, so someone would come to give them their rewards. As for Chu Mo, he also received the rewards that belonged to him from Mo Shanshan 10 copies of the Unicorn Jade Liquid. 5 more than what was originally promised. This made Chu Mo somewhat surprised. "Miss Mo, what are you?" Guest Minister Chu, "I already know the matter from Steward Qian. Everyone in this line was able to come back smoothly, all because of you. The extra 5 portions of Unicorn Jade Liquid is what you deserve." Hearing that, Chu Mo pondered for a moment, then nodded his head and said, "In that case, then thanks a lot." Afterward, after chatting with Mo Shanshan for a few more sentences, Chu Mo offered to leave. After he left, inside the house, Mo Shanshan could not help but take a deep breath. "I originally thought that I had paid enough attention to Chu Hakiai, but I didn't expect him to break my perception once again." In her mind, she recalled Qian Yuan's words that recounted Chu Mo's beheading of the skybreaker White Weasel. Until now, she was unable to calm her emotions. The skybreaking White Weasel, as a third-grade ferocious beast and mastering the ability to travel through the void, even a Zhongsher encountered it would be quite troublesome. But Chu Mo, however, hardened and killed it. How long has it been? It had already grown to such a level. Such talent was simply appalling. Perhaps that matter can invite Chu Mo to participate. After seeing such a heaven-defying talent of Chu Mo, Mo Shanshan couldn't help but give birth to a thought in her heart.